If you've been making changes to your nutrition and your exercise and your sleep, and you're wondering if any of this is actually helping or is it doing anything, well, here's some good news. Your body can start showing signs of improvement within just 24 to 48 hours of those changes. That's how fast it can start. The problem is those early signs usually don't show up on a standard lab or a blood test right away. Your A1C takes months to change and your fasting glucose still looks the same. But that doesn't mean nothing is happening. Your body has already been responding to all the work you've been putting in. You just have to know what to look for. So in this video, I want to walk you through 8 early signs that your insulin resistance is already reversing, starting with the ones that show up first. And there's a very good chance you've already noticed some of these. And when I say insulin resistance, I mean that state where your cells are no longer responding well to insulin. So your body has to keep making more to keep your blood sugar under control. And that is one of the most common themes we see in all the conditions that plague us today. So things like high blood pressure and heart disease, fatty liver and visceral fat, and prediabetes, and eventually type 2 diabetes. And if you're new to this channel, I'm Dr. Leonid Kim. I'm a double board certified physician, and on this channel, my mission is to give you the science and the practical tools to live longer and feel better. Let's get into it. Okay, sign number 1 that your insulin resistance is reversing is decreased bloating and less water retention. And this is often one of the very first changes people notice. If you've changed your nutrition or exercise the last few days, you may feel a little lighter and less puffy in the face. You may have a little less swelling in your ankles, and your rings fit a little looser. That's not in your head. There's a real physiological reason for this. Insulin doesn't just affect blood sugar. It also directly controls how your kidneys handle sodium. When insulin levels are chronically elevated, which is exactly what happens with insulin resistance, your kidneys start holding on to more sodium than they should. And when your body holds on to extra sodium, it holds on to extra water right along with it. That's where some of that puffiness comes from, the bloated abdomen and the swollen ankles at the end of the day, or a fuller face. A lot of that is driven by elevated insulin acting on the kidneys. So when insulin sensitivity starts to improve, one of the first things that happens is insulin levels begin to come down. And when that happens, your kidneys just start letting go of some of that extra sodium they've been holding on to, and water goes right along with it. So the early drop on the scale in the first few days, or the fact that your face looks a little less round in the morning, that's not fat loss just yet, and that is one of the earliest signals that what you're doing is actually working. Now the second sign surprises a lot of people because of how quickly it can happen. So we're talking about reduced hunger and fewer cravings, especially for sugar and processed carbohydrates. And this can start happening just within the first few days. So if you notice you're not reaching for snacks as much, or that typical 3 p.m. sugar craving is just a little quieter, or you may feel that you can actually make it between meals without feeling shaky, pay attention to that. When you're insulin resistant, your cells are just not absorbing glucose efficiently. So even if there's plenty of glucose floating around in your bloodstream, your cells just cannot access it the way they should. And your brain interprets that as a fuel shortage. So as a result, it sends out signals that constantly say we need more energy. And it tends to push you towards the fastest energy sources it knows, which is usually sugar and refined carbohydrates, all things that give us rapid blood sugar spikes. But as insulin sensitivity starts to improve, your cells can finally take in glucose more effectively and more efficiently, so your brain stops getting that same false alarm. And once that happens, your hunger starts to feel more normal again. That shift has very little to do with willpower. A lot of that excessive hunger and cravings and food noise, it was never about discipline. It was just a fuel delivery problem. And when the chemistry improves, the cravings often improve right along with it. And that brings us to sign number 3, which is better energy and less of that heavy and sleepy feeling after meals. You know that feeling after eating, especially after a very carb-heavy meal, where your eyelids get a little heavy and your brain just slows down. A lot of people call that a food coma, and people think that's normal. It is common, but it's definitely not normal. When you're insulin resistant and you eat a meal high in refined carbohydrates, your blood sugar tends to spike higher and faster, and then your pancreas releases a large amount of insulin trying to bring the glucose down and push it into all the resistant cells. And that sharp rise followed by a sharp drop is what often leaves you feeling drained and sleepy. And this is where your mitochondria come in. Mitochondria are these tiny structures inside your cells that turn fuel and oxygen into ATP, which is that usable energy your cells actually run on. So every movement, every muscle contraction, every thought, every signal your brain sends all of that depends on your ATP. But when you're insulin resistant, that fuel supply becomes more unstable. Your cells are continuously dealing with spikes and dips instead of a steadier stream of energy. And mitochondria do not work as well under those conditions. But as insulin sensitivity starts to improve, your blood sugar starts to stabilize, and those swings begin to flatten out, and your cells can start producing energy more efficiently again. And we can actually see this happen pretty quickly. Studies have shown that even just 7 days of moderate intensity cycling can improve your mitochondrial function and increase energy production in your muscle. So if you've been feeling a little more steady or a little less drained after meals, that's one of the early signs that your metabolism is already moving in the right direction. And that leads us right into sign number 4, which is better mental clarity. If your thinking feels a little sharper lately, and maybe it's easier to focus, or your brain fog is just not hitting as hard, that is another early sign that your insulin sensitivity is improving. Your brain only makes up about 2% of your body's weight, but it uses about 20% of your total body's energy. So when energy delivery is off, your brain feels it almost immediately. Your brain cells actually have their own insulin receptors. So when insulin signaling is not working well, glucose delivery to the brain becomes less efficient. But there is more to the story than just your brain running low on fuel. Insulin resistance is also linked to chronic low-grade inflammation, which then translates to less blood getting to your brain tissue. So this is why it's so important to reverse insulin resistance. It gives you a triple whammy of low fuel and bad circulation and increased inflammation. But as insulin sensitivity improves, so does your brain's ability to take in glucose efficiently and run on a steady supply of energy. And over time, that translates into clearer thinking and better focus and less brain fog. And research shows that this shows up pretty quickly, just within days to a couple of weeks of lifestyle changes. Now, sign number 5 is really interesting because this relationship goes both ways. As insulin sensitivity improves, sleep often improves too, but poor sleep can also worsen insulin resistance, so these two problems can often feed off each other. And the research on this is pretty eye-opening. So there was a study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism. They took healthy participants and they went through 2 different conditions. In one phase, they got 8 hours in bed, and in the other phase, their sleep was restricted to just 4 hours per night for 5 nights, and nothing else changed. Same diet, they had same activity. The only difference was just less sleep. And after just 5 nights of this, researchers measured their insulin sensitivity using a hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp, which is the gold standard test for how well the body responds to insulin. And what they found was when they restricted their sleep, their insulin sensitivity dropped by about 25%. And peripheral insulin sensitivity, which is how well your muscles and your tissues take in glucose, dropped by 29%. Now, this was a small study. They only had 14 participants. But since then, multiple meta-analyses have confirmed the same pattern. Poor sleep pushes insulin resistance in the wrong direction every time. So what happens when you start reversing insulin resistance in this case? Well, the negative loop actually starts to break. And as inflammation comes down and blood sugar becomes more stable, your sleep quality actually starts to improve as well. And you see this in sleep architecture. So you may spend more time in deeper and more restorative sleep, and you'll wake up less throughout the night, and you'll feel more rested in the morning. And because your blood sugar is now more stable, you're also not getting those middle of the night cortisol spikes that wake you up. And the amazing part about all of this is better sleep then further improves your insulin sensitivity. So the same loop that was working against you now starts working in your favor. All right, sign number 6 is your waist circumference may start to go down, sometimes even before you see any changes on the scale. And this is one of the most encouraging changes because it reminds us that the scale is not the only thing that matters. In those early phases, how your clothes fit actually tells you a lot more about your progress than your body weight. There's a very strong link between insulin resistance and visceral fat, which is the fat stored around your internal organs, especially in your liver, your intestines, and your pancreas. And insulin is one of the main hormonal signals that influences where your body tends to store fat. When insulin stays chronically elevated, the body is pushed towards storing more fat centrally around the abdomen and the organs. But as insulin levels start to come down, you see your changes in your visceral fat first as well. Multiple studies have shown that even a modest 5% loss in total body weight can lead to a 15 to even 25% reduction in visceral fat. In other words, you don't need dramatic total weight loss to start making meaningful progress where it matters the most. And this is where exercise can really supercharge your progress. If you look at these meta-analyses, we see that 5% weight loss with exercise led to a 21% reduction in visceral fat. Now compare that to only 13% with diet alone. So diet can absolutely get you there, and it's the foundation of everything we do. But if you want to get there faster, adding exercise nearly doubles the visceral fat loss. So if you're already cleaning up nutrition and wondering whether the exercise piece is actually worth your time, well, this is one of the many places where it really pays off. Now, let's talk about blood pressure because this is another area where people can see changes relatively quickly. As insulin sensitivity improves, blood pressure often starts to come down too. And that is because insulin resistance directly affects blood vessels. Inside your arteries, you have a thin inner lining called the endothelium. And when that lining is healthy, it helps blood vessels stay flexible so they can relax and widen when they need to. But that changes with insulin resistance. Insulin resistance causes this chronic low-grade inflammation and oxidative stress, which ultimately damages that important endothelial layer. So blood vessels get stiffer and they don't relax as well. And this is one of the things that makes your blood pressure go up. So this connection goes far beyond than just salt or your body weight. It's also about what is happening at the level of the vessel wall. As the insulin sensitivity improves, well, that endothelial lining starts to recover and your blood vessels regain some of the flexibility. And studies show that you'll start seeing those changes very quickly, just in a matter of days to weeks. So if you're checking your blood pressure at home and noticing that it's trending down, even just by a few points, that is a real sign that your blood pressure is already responding. Okay, let's talk about your skin. Now, this one usually takes longer than the others, usually anywhere from a few weeks to several months, but this is one of the more visible signs. Insulin resistance unfortunately drives many skin changes, and one of the most well-known is acanthosis nigricans, which are those darker velvety patches that often show up on the neck or under the arms or in the skin folds. And insulin resistance can also contribute to acne, which happens through increased androgen activity. Androgens are basically just a group of hormones that include testosterone, and when insulin stays chronically elevated, androgen levels can rise as well, which then leads to more oil production and more breakouts. And then insulin resistance can also lead to skin tags, which are those small, soft growths that usually show up on the neck or the underarms or your back. So as insulin levels come down and your sensitivity improves, well then the main driver behind all these skin changes starts to weaken. Acne starts clearing up as androgen levels normalize. And if you have acanthosis nigricans, well, that can gradually lighten. And with skin tags, the existing ones won't go away on their own, but you may stop getting as many new ones. So early on in our journey to get healthier, I encourage all of my patients to focus on these early signs and milestones because these things will show up a lot sooner than any of the changes in the blood work. Hope this is helpful, stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next one.